evolution of surveillance technology is quite a fascinating thing. Now in 2015, the potential for this technology has not only become much more expanded, but it has also become increasingly more detailed. The Canadian government knows more about us than they ever have before, and their database continues to grow. Governments have created many types of legislation in the past that try to take advantage of the surveillance technologies that exist today in both the physical and virtual world. Recently, this has taken the form of Bill C-51, which has caused quite the controversy, specifically in regards to concerns of its new surveillance powers and abilities that it gives to the government and police. Although this type of legislation is seen as taking advantage of new surveillance technologies in order to consolidate power, maybe there is a way for Canadians to have both safety and privacy. First, let's begin by taking a look at how the government's use of these new surveillance technologies can have both positive and negative implications. Through online surveillance and other new surveillance abilities, our CMP powers have become much more widespread and detailed. This can be a positive because, of course, there are legitimate threats that need to be addressed. Online surveillance would certainly make the tracking much easier of the people issuing threats or harm, and it could potentially help to stop them before the threat turns to action. At the same time, increasing police powers in terms of online surveillance could lead to discrimination and abuse of those powers if there is no oversight. How will we know that the information being gathered about a person is being gathered for the right reasons and being used lawfully? Also, how will we know if the term innocent until proven guilty is being followed?
One tool that millions of people around the globe utilize to increase their anonymity online is the Onion Router, or the Tor network. It was developed in the mid-1990s by the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory in an effort to make U.S. intelligence communications online more secure. Ironically, it is now used by many people to try and avoid surveillance by those very intelligence organizations. Essentially, the Tor network is set up like the many layers of an onion. It directs internet traffic through a worldwide volunteer network of several thousand relays to conceal a user's IP address and usage from anyone conducting network surveillance. It makes it extremely difficult but not impossible to trace the internet usage back to the original user. Intelligence agencies in the U.S., such as the FBI and NSA, over the last few years have admitted that they target users of Tor for more scrutiny, such as in the NSA's X-Keyscore program. To be sure, there are dubious characters that use the anonymity of Tor for more nefarious activities, but the use of Tor has also been praised for providing a means for safe communication for everyday internet users who want to circumnavigate censorship, political activists who live in countries with despotic regimes, and even at-risk women who need to avoid communication with stalkers. In an ironic twist, it is these vulnerable users who have benefited from Tor who now find themselves within the crosshairs of various intelligence agencies simply for using the Tor software.
Despite of new technological advances, surveillance and profiling may not always be accurate. Various levels of greater complexity give rise to the potential for greater procedural and interpretive error. Let's look at the case of a telecommunications engineer, Maher Arar, with a dual Syrian and Canadian citizenship. He was detained at John Kennedy International Airport in September 2002, on his way home to Canada from Tunis. He was held in solitary confinement in the United States for 2 weeks. The U.S. government suspected him of being a member of Al-Qaeda and deported him not to Canada but to Syria, where he was detained and tortured for almost a year until his release back to Canada. Later, the Syrian government stated that Arar was completely innocent. A Canadian commission publicly cleared him of any connections to terrorist organizations. In May 2008, RCMP closed investigation without concluding who leaked the false information. With the evolution of technologies and social media sites, online surveillance is being drastically normalized. As a result, the boundaries between private and public become fuzzy and blurry. Popular culture also takes part in normalization of surveillance through some television shows and feature films. For instance, CSI television series promotes the idea of technological neutrality, surveillance invisibility, and a rather uncritical and neo-positive view on power and data gathering. And moral conception of crimes and people's actions is constituted in a moral divide between good majority and evil minority. This kind of mindset contributes to general acceptance of constantly being under surveillance. Another concern is the potential for function creep. Function creep occurs when data gathered by surveillance methods for defined specific purpose is subsequently used to provide information pertaining to different objectives. Social media sites like Facebook contain advertising schemes that repurpose personal information into marketing data. Their compliance with law enforcement and security agencies suggests a function creep where this same data is repurposed as evidence. On one hand, it's a great help for police investigations of threats to national security, but on the other, there are no guarantees that utilized personal data is being used only in legitimate ways.
While there is no stopping technology from expanding, nor would we want the government to refrain from protecting our best interest, maybe there are some ways for security and privacy to peacefully coexist. One example comes from Simon Chesterman's idea of a social contract. If we think about this in terms of online surveillance, he would say that the government must be transparent in regards to their use of technologies, there must be strict laws established that they must follow, and that they must be held accountable for any intended or unintended abuse of power or discrimination that could result. All three of these aspects allow the government and citizens of Canada to work together dynamically to make sure that laws are being followed and that there is still an active push towards protection of privacy.
Although online surveillance is not necessarily a direct cause of discrimination on the public by the part of government, many people fear that it could be used as a tool to increase discrimination on certain groups by various agencies that have a less than scrupulous agenda. Many people believe that it is dangerous in a democratic society to allow claims of secrecy to prevent open evaluation as to whether governments have violated the constitutional rights of privacy to its citizens. According to the Electronic Frontier Foundation, a digital rights advocacy group, conducting more thorough and continuous research into these surveillance practices is one way to help prevent the rise of abuse of power in the name of security. It also calls for more dialogue between governments and human rights groups, such as the ACLU, which recently filed a challenge to NSA's warrantless internet backbone surveillance, also known as upstream surveillance. Through such increased dialogue, it is hoped that a more collegial and less adversarial relationship can be established between intelligence agencies and human rights watchdogs, and through this, the public's right to engage in private communication is upheld and affirmed.
Despite all of the concerns and tensions, social media users must realize their own responsibility for their exposure on social media. Even though managing online visibility may be challenging, internet users still have control over at least some of the personal content they voluntarily reveal in cyberspace.
Citizens can't remain complacent while some of our fundamental rights are being compromised, but at the same time, we also can't ignore the fact that there are still some genuine security threats in the cyber world. The balance between security, surveillance, and people's fundamental right to privacy is a dynamic that needs to be constantly negotiated. It is our responsibility as citizens to hold government accountable with regard to their practices, while at the same time, the government is responsible to conduct their activities in a manner that is as transparent as possible without compromising their security objectives.
Watching. Tell me who's watching? Who's watching me?